When the House is in recess and the government is, not doing so much, then Farage can dominate the media agenda. And that's what he's done.
You can kind of tell just how utterly, dreadfully unromantic I am that I decided to spend Valentine's Day not with my partner that I was having my first child with, but, over in some war zone.
The penny dropped.
He thought you were like having a bit of afternoon delight. Hello and welcome to Electoral Dysfunction from Sky News with me, Ruth Davidson.
And me, Harriet Harman. And sadly, no Beth today. She's traded in her budget hotel rooms for a tent in a field somewhere. And I too am in the English countryside with three of my grandchildren.
So without Beth, we've been let loose for a week of parliamentary recess. So basically, the shackles are off and anything can happen. And in honour of it being the holidays for lots of people, we're going to do that thing that we love to do, which is answer your questions. And we've had a question here in from Joe.
So this is what Joe asks. In political news in recent days, a lot has been made of Nigel Farage being on holiday even while Parliament is sitting at the time of key EU negotiations. I remember similar stories about other MPs being on holiday during Parliament in the past. My question for Ruth and Harriet: as people who have sat in Parliament, what is your view on members taking holiday absences? Is there any stigma around this in Parliament? What are the accepted norms or etiquette for politicians?
If you think about the terms of Parliament and the holidays, which are also called recesses, they kind of stick to the school holidays. Now, when I say there's a recess from Parliament, don't for 1 second think that politicians aren't working, because you have to get through a power of work in your constituency and actually kind of catch up on some of the constituency stuff that when you've got long terms in Parliament you don't do. It's sometimes a bit difficult for politicians in Scotland because the parliamentary recesses in the Commons don't mirror if they've got kids. They're kids' holidays because the school holidays in Scotland are very different. But it is kind of bad form to take your holiday not during recess, because the recesses give you ample of opportunity to do so. Would you agree, Harriet?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the way to think about this, Joe, is that once you're elected, you've kind of got a contract, if you like, with your constituents. You are their one and only MP, and you've got to be there for them, even if you're on holidays or when the House is sitting or when the House isn't sitting, the whole time. And certainly there's an expectation that when the House is sitting, you are in there, you're voting whichever way, you're asking questions, and to just go off on holiday when the House is sitting, well, that's not what your job is. So it is sort of looked down on. But I think really, as Ruth says, even if you're on holiday or even out of the country, if something happens in your constituency, even if Parliament's not sitting, you are expected to come back. I mean, I remember when I was on holiday in France and there was like riots in my constituency in Peckham, and I immediately jumped on a plane and came back home. But it's slightly different between opposition and government, because in government, obviously, the ministers have to be there the whole time. They've got to be putting legislation through, and they kind of hold the mic. They can dominate the news media with the announcements they're making and with the bills they're introducing. And it's quite hard for the opposition to get a hearing whilst the government is in full swing. They just might get some sort of reaction opportunity, but they're not like driving the agenda. And what we used to do when we were in opposition before 97 is that as soon as there was a bank holiday and the House was not sitting, as soon as there was half term or the summer recess, we would be like on an absolute war footing and dominate the airwaves, because that was our opportunity. And I think that's a bit of what Farage has done this week. So he's clearly making the judgments. Once the government is driving things forward on EU negotiations, he's not the main show in town. The main show in town is Keir Starmer saying, here is my EU reset. And he's dominating the situation. But when the government, when the House is in recess and the government is, not doing so much, then basically Farage can dominate the media agenda. And that's what he's done with his we are the party of the family. We're going to increase the married couples tax allowance. We are going to end the 2-child benefit cap. So he's kind of stepped forward and he's using this moment of the House not sitting in order to actually get his voice heard. The opportunity is there for the opposition in a way when the House isn't sitting, in the way that it's not when the House is sitting. And I remember once when Anne Taylor, we created her to be shadow minister for drought, when there was a drought one summer and the government was exhausted and clocked off basically. And all summer we dominated the airwaves with, every time there wasn't a drop of rain, our drought minister was up on every single media and news channel proclaiming Labour's arguments about absolutely everything. So really it's sensible for the opposition to take the opportunity of when the House is not sitting to kind of grab the mic. And that is what Nigel Farage has done. And interestingly, it doesn't seem to be what Kemi Badenoch's doing. She shadows the government when they are actually in the House and dominating everything, but she doesn't seem to be grabbing the mic like Nigel Farage has done when the House is not sitting and there's greater opportunity for the opposition.
There's other conventions in the House too, Joe. You're asking about what the kind of convention is for taking holidays. I don't even notice that if there's other reasons that people aren't there, especially the leaders. So if the Prime Minister is at a G7 or a Commonwealth Heads of Government or a G20 or something like that, the leader of the opposition doesn't do Prime Minister's questions that day. They leave it to all the deputies. Although when I was leader of the party in Scotland, of the Conservative Party in Scotland, I didn't do that and purposefully didn't do that. But I was always quite good at sometimes when you do trips and stuff as a politician, trying to make sure that they fell in recess too, so that I wasn't absent from Parliament. And there was one trip I remember I went to Afghanistan with the Halo Trust, which is that big mine clearance charity. The only way I could make it work with my diary was the day I had my embryo implanted from IVF. I then left the hospital, had about 90 minutes sleep in a hotel room in Glasgow, jumped on a plane to Helmand in Afghanistan and did operations there. And I'd phoned my partner, Jen. She just got these missed calls from me. And then she was in her work. When she got out of her work, she phoned me back several times. We just kept missing each other for hours and hours and hours. And it turns out she had been going out of her mind with worry because her potentially pregnant, carrying potentially her first child, in a war zone was, hundreds of thousands of miles away and was unable to get hold of me. And when we finally kind of caught up later on, she was giving out to me and I was like, oh, no, don't worry about it. It's fine. Like, everything's fine. The flight was fine. Everything's grand. I was just phoning to see if you would take me Endeavour. She went ballistic. But I know it was over the February recess because Valentine's Day happened while I was over there. So you can kind of tell just how utterly, dreadfully unromantic I am that I decided to spend Valentine's Day not with my partner that I was having my first child with, but over in some war zone poking at things that blew up. So anyway, Harriet, that was my story about Jen getting me in trouble. Have you ever missed anything in Parliament?
When I was first an MP, it was 97% men, only 3% women, and the idea was that women couldn't possibly be members of Parliament, but certainly not if they have children. And since I had 3 children, I was always on the defensive to show that I was doing my job. Whenever the House was sitting, I would be there. Whenever the House wasn't sitting, I would be in the constituency, or at least, always available to come back from holidays if there was something happening in my constituency, in order to not allow people to say, see, that's what happened when you get a woman MP. They just don't do their job properly because they're looking after their children. But I had promised my son and his friend Robert that I would take them to the Bromley Odeon to see the new film, The Bear, in the half term. And to my horror, the half term dates were announced and they didn't coincide. So this was a Monday when the House was sitting and I was shadow health spokesperson. And I thought, well, I've been promising for weeks that I would go to the Bromley Odeon and I would take them to this film. I just cannot break my word to these little boys. So I set off and I had my pager in my pocket, obviously. Halfway through this film, the pages started going and going, and I thought, oh my God, what on earth is happening? So I dropped them off, and then off I went to the House of Commons, to my horror to discover that there'd been an emergency statement that the government had put on about the ambulance dispute. And we were obviously backing the ambulance workers. And Robin Cook, who was the Shadow Health Secretary, was my boss. And he was from a constituency in Scotland. And he'd been up in the air and couldn't get to the House of Commons on time. So I should have been there as his deputy, and everybody was like, where were you? And Robin Cook called me into his office, and I was absolutely terrified. And he said, where were you? And somehow the words, I was in the Bromley Odeon, I could not get those words out. I was too terrified. And for some reason I said, I was not available. And at this point, Robin's eyes twinkled and he said, in that case, we'll say no more about it.
What?
And suddenly, the penny dropped.
He thought you were like having a bit of afternoon delight, a bit of the old rumpy pumpy.
Absolutely. So therefore, he and I were in this then conspiracy thereafter. Little did he know, but I thought, well, this is the House of Commons. You know, if you're in the Bromley Odeon, you're absolutely strung up. But if not, you'll get very good cover.
I mean, Harry, firstly, well done you that he thought you were such a goer. I mean, hats off that he thought that was credible. Because I look at half of these politicians when there's some sex scandal that erupts, and I'm like, really? Really? Anyway, sorry, that's just me.
I mean, the most important thing is that you've got to be there for your constituency and you've got to not take the mick about Parliament. And I think actually one of the things that Nigel Farage is doing is when he goes around the world, he's trying to show that he's a statesperson, on the international stage. And he's thinking, there's not much in it for me being in Parliament, asking, the 15th question of a government minister. I might as well strut about abroad and then grab the microphone whilst the House is not sitting and dominate the news agenda.
Anyway, if you've got a question like Joe, the number to WhatsApp is 07934 200 444. That's 07934 to the burner phone, 200 444. Or you can email us on electoraldysfunction@sky.uk. We're back, and for the full audio version of this podcast, we are treating our listeners to a bit of our chat with Armando Iannucci, as recorded at our live show in London last week.
The full show will be available to watch on here very soon, so you'll have all of Armando, as well as our usual chat and a listener Q&A. But shall we show you a bit of what to expect?
Yeah, let's do that. Here's a little bit of Armando.
OK, this is for you, Armando.
Oh, right, yes.
Yeah, it's actually addressed to you. Which British politician most reminds you of Selina Meyer? She's the VP in Veep. If you haven't seen it, you must watch it. In terms of being a complete moral vacuum.
Okay. I'm going to go for a kind of like a Frankenstein's monster of... there's a little bit vacuumism, because there is an element of that with Starmer, I feel, in that, again, you touched on that there isn't that... what are you for? What would you want us to do? There's that slight, it almost has that look of, I don't know. Blair was very, and Johnson was. Starmer looks like he's been caught in the rain and the taxi he booked is at least half an hour late.
Thank you for joining us this week. We'll be welcoming Beth back from her camping trip next week, but from now, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.